We have learned a lot more about the complicated relationship between Sean Diddy Combs and Jane, another alleged victim in this sex trafficking, racketeering, and prostitution case. From audio tapes to texts to payments to Homeland Security searches to extortion to alleged violence, what exactly happened in court today and how does it fit into the overall case? Let's talk to our in-court reporter, Law&Crime's Elizabeth Millner, to get to the bottom of it. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Hey everybody, this is another Law&Crime legal alert. If you received Depo-Provera birth control shots and were later diagnosed with a brain or spinal tumor called meningioma, you may be eligible for a lawsuit. That's right, Morgan & Morgan is investigating claims that patients weren't properly warned about this risk. It's free to check, just takes a few minutes, and you don't pay unless they win. So scan the QR code on screen, click the link below, or head over to forthepeople.com/LCDepo to see if you qualify. Okay. Lot to get into when it comes to Jane's testimony, because the last we discussed, she was testifying about these hotel nights, these debauchery nights, that she would be performing sex acts with other men in front of Sean Combs. And she even alleged that she was tasked with doing this after she threw up and even after she was physically exhausted. She claims she vocalized in different ways to Sean Combs, her partner, how she didn't want to keep on doing this. She testified that Combs gave her cash and gifts and paid for her rent, but it's complicated. It's complicated by her messages to Sean Combs. It's complicated by her testimony that she was with Combs basically a few weeks up until his arrest. And you also have to wonder, is it also complicated with what she said today, including new allegations of violence that have changed the trajectory of her testimony? So a lot to get into with what happened today. Let me bring on Elizabeth Millner, Law&Crime's in-court reporter who was there for every minute of the action. Elizabeth, so good to see you. Thank you so much for taking the time. I feel like a large portion of the beginning of the day, for the first few hours, was dedicated to the prosecution asking her to elaborate and explain her reluctance to engage in these sex acts. And it becomes a question of whether or not it was her as a girlfriend or partner who just didn't want to do this, or, as part of a relationship issue, or whether it was a crime. This was non-consensual, a form of force, fraud, or coercion used to induce her into engaging in commercial sex acts with men in all different cities. So, Elizabeth, what was the testimony from the first few hours today about this reluctance?
Yeah, well, there was a lot of text messages that were shown specifically to the jurors and the witness and the parties. Unfortunately, we weren't able to see them in the gallery because of a pre-existing order whenever Jane was to take the stand, and that has been going on since last week. So we haven't been able to see exhibits, I want to say, since last Thursday, but we're hearing these text messages as AUSA Maureen Comey and even Jane herself are just kind of reading through a number of these text messages, either from her and Diddy, between herself and the escorts. But as far as just her and Diddy goes, right off the bat, as we had started this morning, we see a text message between Jane and Diddy from September 15th of 2023, where Jane was texting Diddy on these different phones because he has more than one phone. And Jane would say, should we start looking for Sunday night flights? And Jane said, love and miss you, mine's forever. And Diddy's responding, send me some SHIT of you being a bad girl. And Jane believed that those messages about her sending him something was for her to send sexually explicit videos to Diddy, and Diddy had responded, when is the earliest you can get here? Jane says that she didn't want to send this particular video, and Diddy said something along the lines of, the F, I'm asking you to do this, I have the phones, and those phones being with the phones that they have of explicit videos together. Diddy said, stop it, don't say no to me, and Jane says, well, I'm traveling with our phone, and Jane says that Diddy would record on his two phones, and then his assistants and staff had easy access to it, so they had this separate phone to record their sexually explicit videos together. And Jane was saying in these messages, that phone doesn't look, and I'm paraphrasing here because they go by so fast when they were kind of saying these out loud, and Jane had said, you're using our vids to get a erect with someone else. And Diddy said, bye, I was asking you to send something, good night. Jane says, well, I'm not going to New York, you're texting me so that way you can get erect for somebody else. And Jane says that she saw on a podcast that he was bragging essentially about having sex for 48 hours completely with someone else. And so Diddy had told her that no sex was involved on this trip, where he was going on this podcast with another person, another woman that Diddy was seeing, and just kind of bragging about this. And this 48-hour trip that he was kind of talking about was on a yacht, and that Diddy told her that he was going to take her on this specific trip, and that Jane agreed to do a hotel night after he had promised her to take her on this trip, and that he ended up not taking her on the trip. So it seems like it's kind of going possibly into the prosecution's argument, which they believe it's sex trafficking by fraud, where he was promising her to do these things and then she would comply with it, but then he would end up not like taking her out on like special dinners or anything like that. And you kind of can see both sides of this, right? Like where, okay, is it a crime for a man to lie to you? Not necessarily, but according to the prosecution and their argument, they think because that she was complying and doing these hotel nights, that kind of played into their kind of theory of the case. And so then we see more exhibits, text messages from Jane and Diddy, where Diddy is saying, what happened? I'm sad what happened. Jane is saying, well, I don't want to be used and locked in a room to fulfill your fantasies. We hear about an exhibit from September 16th of that same year of 2023. But this one is a note from Jane's notes app, where she says that she kind of just writes out her feelings similar to diary entries, and then sometimes will kind of copy and paste, send them as a text message, where Jane did just that, where she had said, as much as I want to see you, I don't want to be treated like a hoe in a hotel room. And Jane was explaining that she was just writing out her feelings. And so then we hear about more texts between Jane and Diddy, where Jane is saying, I don't want to be used, locked in a hotel room. I'm starting to realize what this is. And Diddy saying, girl, that was podcast talk. I was alone. I'm tired of your false accusations. I promised on Baby Love, who is his youngest daughter, I didn't have sex. And Jane was saying that wasn't podcast talk, and saying that you made Papa proud. And this was kind of in reference to this podcast where Diddy was kind of talking about this 48 hours of sex essentially. And Diddy had said, bye, always tripping around me. And so then we kind of see more text exhibits where Jane was saying that she wanted to go back to when they first started dating. She said, I opened Pandora's box. She can't seem to close it. She said, one night of fun turned into our entire relationship. I'm crying as I'm writing this. And Diddy is responding, stop, girl, let's talk. And then he sends her an audio message. And then Diddy can be heard on this particular audio message. So the jury is hearing this. We're hearing this out loud inside the courtroom, where Diddy has kind of this raspy voice, and he's saying that he was sick in bed. The message you sent me, what's the problem? We have an actual open relationship. What's the problem? And that Diddy never brought up kind of her concerns about doing these hotel nights. Instead, he just never talked about it in this particular audio message. And so Diddy ended up calling her on a FaceTime and told her what she wanted to hear. That's what she testified to. And Jane testified, he said a lot of things that I like to hear, that he loves me, that he missed me, that he wanted to see me. And so Jane ended up agreeing to go to New York. And this was a trip to New York in September of 2023, where she thought that she was going just for alone time with her boyfriend. And then what ended up being alone time with her boyfriend actually turned into them messaging Cabral, who was an escort that they had used often in their freak-offs. And then Cabral was flown out from Atlanta, Georgia, over here to New York, and that Jane participated in this freak-off with Diddy and, with Cabral, as Diddy kind of watched, and that was what had ended up happening. And so we saw a lot of text messages where she was really just kind of explaining her frustration as far as why Diddy was treating her this way, and making her out to be kind of someone who was only used to fulfill his fantasies, as opposed to the other women that he was kind of taunting out there, kind of to what she was kind of describing in her face a little bit, where she was kind of kept a secret, and that her job essentially was to hire these other men, or to bring these other men for their hotel nights or debauchery nights. And so we saw a lot of text messages from around that time frame where she seemed to be very vocal about voicing her opinion on that she didn't want to do it. But then I think kind of where that area is where maybe it kind of confused the jury is that even afterwards she still did it. And so I feel like when cross-examination eventually happens, that they'll really kind of be like, okay, well, you continue to do this even after you said you didn't want to do this, and you said this, but you did that. And so but overall, a lot of text messages were shown that really
Yeah.
kind of voiced Jane's opinion about just not wanting to do these hotel nights anymore.
Yeah, I saw there was some reporting where she allegedly said, "I'm not a porn star. These experiences are desensitizing sex for me. It's been 3 years of me having to bleep strangers." There was another, "You pair me up with some random man, any bleep for your own sick sexual." And there were parts where it looked, I mean, I wonder if the jury will accept, was he threatening her directly, indirectly? I mean, I believe there was one message, "You're burning a bridge that you're going to need tomorrow." And we know that financial control is a big part of this, gifts, cash, rent. But I have to tell you, Elizabeth, my jaw hit the floor. I think a big controversial moment, if we're trying to understand whether or not she was a willing participant or consented to this, didn't she write in a text message to Sean Combs that she consented in the videos of these sexual encounters? Because we know, according to her testimony, that Sean Combs have recorded some certain of these sex acts. And he basically said what? That if people look at these videos, they'll see it was consensual. Didn't she agree with that? Or I might be completely wrong.
So Jane was kind of vocalizing just her displeasure of having to do these wild debauchery nights or hotel nights just with other men, that she always wanted to be having sex with her partner, and her partner being Sean Combs. So she messaged Diddy saying that you place these harmful men on me, and Diddy had responded, "Well, talk to God, I'm gonna pray for you, you're burning a bridge that you aren't prepared to pay for." And Jane said that in the text that she knew that she had consented to being on this tape, but she said she was uncomfortable, but she kept doing this because she loved Diddy, and that Diddy kind of even threw in her face that she appeared to be enjoying it. She appeared to be excited even while she was on these freak-off tapes or these sexually explicit videos. And Jane says, "Well, I'm sorry, I want to feel better." And that was in reference to her just feeling uncomfortable throughout this entire process. And so Jane admitted while she was on the stand that she did watch her own freak-off tapes, and she said that I was being high and following a pattern in the majority of these tapes. It was like watching the same show over and over again. And so this was kind of at a point in, I guess, her and Diddy's relationship where she was really just kind of telling him that she didn't want to be doing these hotel nights anymore, and that the videos were kind of thrown back into her face. But it seems like from her perspective, while she was on the stand, I should say, that she didn't feel as comfortable as maybe the video may have portrayed her to look as more comfortable and consenting in this process.
Yeah, I wonder how much the jury is going to wrestle with the idea. Did she vocalize enough her perceived lack of consent? You know, there was a part of it where she talked about in her notes app, she said she was having PTSD, but was that properly communicated to Sean Combs? It's important for a legal analysis. Now, there was another change in her testimony because she had testified she's having these problems with Sean Combs, right? They're back and forth on this. And then Cassandra Ventura files her lawsuit in November 2023. What was her reaction to Cassie's lawsuit? And what did she communicate to Sean Combs after that lawsuit came out?
And so I will say this about the prosecution when they were kind of laying this out to get eventually to Cassie's lawsuit, is they were kind of showing us piece by piece, month by month, all these text exhibits, or we were hearing about these text exhibits. The jury actually saw them, but just about how Jane was uncomfortable by doing these hotel nights, right? But then we get to Cassie's lawsuit, and I was really kind of surprised to hear Jane's reaction while she was on the stand about Cassie's lawsuit. Because even in reference before, where her and Diddy would get in kind of these verbal spats with one another, where Jane would kind of throw out, "I'm no Gina, I'm no Cassie." And so I thought, okay, well, once we get to Cassie's lawsuit, maybe she didn't have the nicest things to say about Cassie in reference to her lawsuit. But as far as Jane is concerned, it was actually the opposite of what I was initially thinking. So when we get to the part about Cassie's lawsuit, Jane was explaining that it was all over the place. I almost fainted. In fact, I think I did. And then Maureen Comey asked, "Well, why?" And she says, "Because there were 3 specific pages that were just hair away." And mind you, when Jane's on the stand, she is very soft-spoken. Sometimes when she's like testifying, I'm just kind of like, oh my goodness, I need to hear you a little bit louder. But she's very soft-spoken when she's on the stand. But Jane was explaining that she read the entire complaint, and that she said these pages resembled my own experience. I was bewildered. I was in shock. I couldn't sleep. It felt like a nightmare. And so the jury was able to see an exhibit of Cassie's lawsuit that was filed on November 16th of 2023. Jane said, previously she did meet Cassie a couple times, but in passing. She said it was around the 2015-ish time frame, so that's notably when when Cassie was still with Diddy. And the two had met at a fashion show and at a Father's Day celebration. But the two never spoke outside of just meeting each other in passing years before she had even filed her lawsuit, that being Cassie. But Jane was saying that she had a lot of sympathy. She says, I can't believe I'm reading my own story. And that was in reference to Jane talking about Cassie's lawsuit. And then this is when she's kind of getting emotional on the stand, a little choked up here, where Jane was explaining that she texted Diddy after. So we heard about a text message, this from November 17th of 2023. It was between Jane and it was between Diddy. So that was the day after Cassie had filed her lawsuit, but also the same day that lawsuit was settled, but also the same day the federal government opened their investigation into Diddy. So a lot's kind of going on in that day unknowingly to Jane. But the text from Diddy said, SMH, I'm stressed and sad. We're supposed to be on the same page. Jane said, well, how can we both be on the same page? And then she was saying that she had to go to the doctor. And then Jane, a couple days later on November 19th, she said, I've been crying for 3 days. I feel like I'm reading my own sexual trauma. You recently threw me up in a hotel for days. God woke me up from this sick trauma. And again, I'm paraphrasing here. There was a lot more in this message where Jane was explaining, I feel manipulated. This was sexual exploitation. You knew this was coming. You made me feel gaslit. You made me feel crazy. Because also remember around this time, everyone, Jane was texting Diddy that she was starting to feel very uncomfortable doing these hotel nights and felt like that was the only thing that she was being used for. Then Diddy, a couple days after she had sent that message about crying for 3 days, Diddy said, call me on this phone. It's important. So then there was an exhibit that we heard about. It's from November 19th of 2023. It was a file. And so I was like, okay, well, maybe it's an audio note, it's a voice note, but it was a recording of a phone call. And so you hear Diddy picking up this phone, or at least answering on this phone saying hello. And then it's weird because it kind of sounds like they're in a car. It sounds like they're outside. It was kind of weird to at first initially listen to this. And so I'm trying to write down everything that Diddy is saying to her. And he is saying, I'm sorry you feel this way. I know we can't talk on these phones. I called and reached out to you. Sorry you feel this way. It was some kinky shit I thought we both enjoyed. I don't want you to feel this way. I'm not supposed to talk on the phone. And then you can hear Jane saying, I've been crying for 3 days, reading it all for word. But what's interesting, Jesse, is that this was a recorded phone call between Jane and Diddy, but Jane said while she was testifying today, she had no idea she was being recorded. She had no idea. She wasn't the one who hit record. She doesn't know how this particular phone call was recorded, but Diddy's on this recording saying, well, everything we did was mutually together. But I think a big question for me is listening to this audio message. I didn't know if he was talking about Jane or if he was talking specifically about Cassie. And so Jane was saying on this recording, well, I'm just effed up right now. It still bothers me. But then you can hear on this particular audio recording just kind of like, at first I didn't know what that sound was, but then Jane had testified that she heard Diddy writing with a Sharpie and a notepad on this recording. So possibly insinuating that he was taking some notes and writing down what she was saying. And so we hear this on the recording, just kind of the scratching of what she says was like a Sharpie pen onto a notepad. And then Diddy's on this recording saying, well, I'm here to help you. You know what I'm saying? Try and take a deep breath, okay? How can I be there for you? Let's get through this together. This was some kinky fun together. I need you to get some rest, please. And then Jane's on the recording saying, I'm going to pray for you. Then Diddy's on the recording saying, call KK if you need me. And Diddy asked if Jane was recording him, which is ironic given the fact that Jane was the one who was unknowingly being recorded on. And so Diddy was saying, and so Diddy was saying that he can't talk on this phone, and Jane was saying that she had told Diddy that we were just talking about this, that being the sexual traumas that she experienced, and then obviously with Cassie's lawsuit it really brought out more things. And then Diddy's on this recording saying, well, you bought me the videotape to look at what we do. Can you get some sleep and we'll talk to you later, or later talk to KK. I need your support, please. If you need anything, call. He said, I need your support, please. If you need anything else, call KK. And then Jane and Diddy spoke on the phone that day. We hear another recording from the same day, November 19th of 2023, still same instance where Jane didn't know she was being recorded, and Diddy can be heard on this recording saying, "I really need your friendship right now. I called you back to make sure you're breathing. You know you don't have to worry about nothing else," and nothing else implying about her rent, her financial situation. And then Diddy said, "Please pray for me. I'll pray for you. I need your friendship." And so it was kind of interesting to hear this. I mean, you know, for us in the press and the media, we've all heard Diddy's voice. I think for the jurors, I'm always wondering what's going on in their head when they're hearing this recording, because as much as, you know, the defendant was a little animated sometimes prior to the judge kind of admonishing him, you really never hear from him. And so I'm wondering all the time when we hear him through his mouth, through his words, allegedly, I'm always wondering what's kind of going through their mind as they're kind of hearing this. But from what I even saw of them, Jesse, it seemed like they were just kind of listening to all of this listening to this and taking it all in.
Well, I wonder if an argument could be made that will be probably made by the prosecution. He did this purposely because he had consciousness of guilt. He knew the Cassie lawsuit. He knew other people could come forward and say something. And he was basically trying to have her on tape, maybe acting like he didn't know this was being recorded, but having her on tape, taking notes. Everything was consensual. This was just freaky, right? We're all good. You know, I'm here for you. You know, again, that could backfire and be quite problematic in the eyes of the jury. Him recognizing that he needs to get everybody else on the same page to say that nothing bad happened, and that, you know, because he realizes that this could be quite problematic. And it seems to me, because we found out that she was basically with him until weeks before his arrest, she was there for another important event. Didn't she testify that she was there when CNN published the hotel surveillance footage of him purportedly beating up Cassie Ventura, and was also there for his planned response, and was also there I think it came out today, his Instagram apology that he released 2 days after the tape was published by CNN. She was a part of all that, right? She was there for all that.
Yeah, honestly, Jesse, in my notes, when they finally played the apology video that I've been thinking that they were going to play possibly even on day one of trial, I wrote finally, literally finally with 4 exclamation points. I'm like, when are they going to show the jury this apology video? But yes, around this time, it was May of 2024, CNN released the video of the Intercontinental Hotel incident, and Jane was explaining that around this time that she was over at Diddy's home in Miami at 2-Star Island, and that they were just sleeping. Then one of his sons knocked on the door and said something is happening, and so then Diddy leaves kind of the bedroom area where they were laying down. And then Jane ended up taking kind of her phone out to see what was going on. And she said, well, all I saw was Sean assaulting Cassie in a hotel. And then Jane was explaining that she had watched the video that CNN released, and that what ended up happening is Diddy invited Jane into a huddle where they could kind of, from what she was describing it, as it's kind of like a PR thing. It felt like that they were trying to find a way to kind of get out there in front of this, come up with some type of response, and that response ended up being a social media video. But to me, I thought it was interesting just the amount of planning and the drafts that this particular video went through before it was published on Instagram, and then obviously it's no longer there. But Jane was explaining that they were trying to come up with this very sincere apology post. They didn't play the video at this point, but then Jane was explaining that the next day Diddy showed Jane a draft of what he would say. And the draft, I thought this was pretty interesting, is that Diddy did address Cassie by name. I think when the video was actually released, a lot of us were like, notably, he did not say her name. But there's a reason for that, and I'll get to that in just a second. But Diddy was telling Jane about the Cassie video, and really kind of going in depth about it in June/July of 2024, and was explaining to Jane that Diddy said that this was the only time that Cassie and Diddy had a physical violent altercation like that, and that Diddy had told Jane that Cassie was actually the hitter in this situation. Obviously, with Cassie's testimony, we know that not to be true, but Jane said that she gave Diddy final feedback on the apology video, and then she went back to LA, and then she saw the apology video, and then we hear the apology video, and the jurors finally see it. It's something that we at Law&Crime have seen a number of times, but I think for the most part, it presumably has been the juror's first time seeing this video. And so then you hear Diddy say, you know, it's so difficult to reflect on the darkest times of your life. My behavior on that video was disgusting. I had to go to therapy. I had to ask God for his mercy and grace. I'm so sorry. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm truly sorry. And then Jane said that she didn't feel this apology was genuine, this particular apology video. And then there was a whole objection from the defense. The jury is dismissed. They're given a break. But then we kind of get into why there was an objection by the defense. And so the government came out and they were like, okay, we'll strike the last part of that answer where Jane was saying that she didn't feel like this apology video was genuine in terms of comparing it to the final draft that was posted versus the draft that she saw, where you do hear Cassie's name. I guess we didn't see that draft, nothing like that, but the draft that actually went out to the public didn't mention Cassie by name. But then the defense chimed in about that, and they were like, well, there was talk about naming Cassie by name. Agnifilo told this to Diddy around this time, because Mark Agnifilo was already Diddy's lawyer by this time. He told us in court today, but Mark Agnifilo was the one who was actually like, do not name Cassie in this apology video. Why? Because she's going to be a grand jury witness, and she likely was a grand jury witness around this time frame. And so the defense was like, well, this entire line of questioning is inappropriate. And the government said, well, this is relevant as it's going into kind of what Jane ends up testifying to next, as far as Diddy beating her. But the judge said, you know, I do see the relevance if Ms. Comey is talking about state of mind, but then the defense seems kind of like, okay, well, this is like a confidential discussion. This is privileged communication. And so then Maureen Comey was eventually like, okay, we'll strike it because I respect privilege issues. And so the jury was told to disregard that part about the video not appearing genuine. But when the jury came back from the break, they replayed that video once again. And Jane knew that this was in reference to the hotel video that we have now seen in the trial multiple times, and that the next time she saw Diddy after this video was released was not until June 18th of 2024. And from Jane's testimony today, that was a date that she specifically remembers. Just a lot of things happening, and a lot of things did happen according to her testimony. But she said after that apology video was released, kind of in May of 2024, then the next time she saw him was in the next month later, that being in June of 2024 too.
It's fascinating to see what was going on behind the scenes. We had always speculated, did he have any help? Was this planned? Was it spur of the moment? So just taking this testimony, it's fascinating to hear about it. Now, she also testified about being extorted. What happened there?
So what's interesting, Jesse, is this alleged extortion actually happened prior to the May 2024 CNN video release of the Intercontinental Hotel incident from 2016. And Jane was explaining this happened shortly after the HSI raids on Diddy's home in both Miami as well as Los Angeles. But I thought what was interesting is that Jane said that investigators even came to her front door. She saw this on a Ring camera video and said that the investigators left a card for her and that Diddy had paid for Jane's lawyers. And after Jane had sent a message to Hakeem, who had worked for Diddy at this point, and then he helped her get in touch with Diddy's lawyers. And then what ended up happening is that the escort Cabral ended up calling Jane, saying that he was going to release the sex tapes on the dark web, presumably after he saw that these HSI raids were being conducted. Because remember that day, I remember that day very clearly, where it was just like kind of like all hands on deck. Diddy's homes are being raided, and so I presume that Cabral might have seen this on the news, and then he had called Jane saying that he was going to release their sex tapes on the dark web, and that Diddy ended up picking up the wrong phone to record this hotel night or debauchery night, and ended up recording this sexually explicit video on Cabral's phone as opposed to Diddy's phone, where that was originally intended it to be. And so Jane was explaining that her heart was just beating so fast, and that Cabral wanted $10,000 for this video. And so Jane ended up calling Diddy to tell him that Cabral was extorting her. She's getting kind of emotional as she's talking about this, because she said a media company ended up calling her and saying that they bought this particular tape and that they were going to end up releasing it. But then she had explained that this media company, which she didn't name or anything like that, so we don't know in terms what type of media company it was that purchased this video, but she had explained that they didn't end up releasing this video And she said even after he being Cabral, had extorted her, she never saw him again. And so this was March of 2024, where she was explaining that she had never saw Cabral again even after this incident. The two had never spoken since then. And so it was kind of interesting, because I remember even just around that time, there was a lot of rumors swirling around that people have videotapes of Diddy and these freak-offs. But according to Jane's testimony, she said that a media company did buy it. But again, we don't know this media company. We don't know who they are, if they were actually going to plan on releasing it. But she was explaining again that she and Cabral never spoke after this particular alleged extortion.
Yeah, I wonder how that fits into the overall charges. Maybe to say, you know, there was a lack of consent, there was a lack of her wanting to have these videos or even these videos released. It wasn't so much on Combs as it was on allegedly on somebody else. So it's interesting, you know, they testify about that. I have to say, I think the finances are really interesting. So the idea, right, Sean Combs controls someone's appearance, controls their careers, controls their livelihood. And there was testimony earlier where she talked about how she wanted to do OnlyFans and he discouraged it. The way that I was reading it, it came up again about her earning her own money. Talk to us about this and whether or not this was during a break in the relationship, because I guess the idea would be if she's earning money on her own, that goes to the idea of this is what she could have been doing, but Sean Combs was controlling it. He was controlling her life. He was controlling her finances to get her to do what he wanted. Did she talk about earning her own money?
She did talk about earning her own money. So this was during an off period that the two had. So this was specifically around January of 2024, where Jane said that her finances actually started to pick back up after she created that OnlyFans. And so she was saying that she just wanted to be independent again, and this is why she had created the OnlyFans page, and that Jane said that she also got child support to help with her finances, but that another man too, this man named Bear, sent her money, and that money was $9,000, so just shy of that extra $1,000 to pay for her rent. But the kind of exchange for it was that Jane would pose for Bear's brand, and that she never actually saw this man in person, but that they only communicated through text. And so it seemed like, as far as Jane was concerned, that her finances were picking up. So Jane was explaining by the time that she and Diddy got back together, which was shortly after her birthday of 2024, that Diddy came to LA, she went to Miami, that things started to seem like they were getting back on track. But then Diddy went through Jane's phone and saw these messages from this man named Bear. And so then we hear about this text exhibit from March 7th of 2024, when the two were already back together at this point, where Diddy said, what's going to happen when I come over? Jane said, well, should I get the house ready for us? And Jane thought that Diddy wanted her to have entertainers over. Diddy told Jane that his mom was coming into town this weekend, and Jane thought that he was just using this as an excuse to see other women. Then Diddy was kind of threatening to cut her off a little bit, where Diddy had asked Jane to sign something so that the two could move on, because he told her that, well, she's making her own money and that they hope to have a clean break. And so Jane was saying that she had testified that she told Diddy that she was paying off her debt, that she was unemployed. She said she was penny pinching. She took on credit card loans. She said that all she asked from Diddy was 3 months, and that she told him, you aren't having your way and you bring up my rent. I'm tired of it. You can't even make these 2 years. And those were the 2 years that the two had promised each other under the love contract, where he would essentially pay her rent for a 2-year period. And so Jane was saying, did you tell Robin to cut me off? She texted me that my lease is up in April of 2024. And then it seemed like, from Diddy's point of view, that he was really upset about this Bear interaction, but other interactions too that Jane had had with other men when she and Diddy were no longer together. But it seemed like, from Jane's perspective, even though she was making money on OnlyFans, even though her finances were slowly picking back up, she seemed like she still kind of wasn't pulling strings, even as far as kind of making the rent on her own, where she was still asking for money from Diddy. And I feel like that's something that the defense might actually point to, especially as it's still currently going on even today.
Yeah, the timeline of the relationship, the rent, the paying for the lawyer, some of the ways that she vocalized or maybe didn't vocalize her reluctance to this, it's all avenues for the defense to exploit, to say that this is not a clean-cut case of sex trafficking, right? And I wonder if things changed when she started talking about violence. So she had already testified that there were certain times when she physically didn't want to engage in these behaviors, these acts, and she still did them. Was it to make him happy? Did she feel the pressure? But talk to me about the violence, because this was something, the alleged violence, this was something that was previewed by the prosecution in the opening statements. What did she say today about violent encounters she had with Sean Combs, or allegedly had with Sean Combs?
Well, she brought up this date specifically, and that date being June 18th of 2024, a date, according to Jane, that she'll always remember. And so Jane was saying that she saw Diddy at her apartment, the very apartment where he still pays her rent, and that Diddy was coming back from a family trip from Utah. And then we hear about this exhibit, and an exhibit was shown to the jury and the witness. That was of Jonathan, that was Diddy's assistant. And Jane said that Jonathan helped her stock up the fridge, put candles up, put red lights up, because red lights was something that Diddy particularly liked. And so then the jury is shown an exhibit photo of Jane, of herself that night. It's kind of a mirror selfie. I was able to get kind of like a little glimpse of it. But Jane said that she and Diddy were having together time that night. She wasn't expecting to have an entertainer that night, that the two were just going to spend a normal night together. And so then the jury sees exhibit photos of Diddy over at her house. They see exhibits of the photos of the red lights in her house, and Jane is explaining that Sean really liked red lights. And then the jurors also seeing a video of Sean Combs, and weirdly enough, the song Lovely Day was playing in the background. And given what she explained next, it was kind of ominous kind of hearing that particular song. But Jane was explaining after the video that she and Diddy got into an argument, that she and Diddy were not on drugs necessarily during this portion, that the two just had champagne and they had tequila together, and that Jane ended up confronting Diddy on who he was with while he was on this family trip to Utah. And Jane was calling him a pedophile, even though the prosecution had to really kind of point out that Diddy wasn't with someone who was underage, that this girl was just 25 years younger than Diddy, according to Jane, and that this was an adult woman. They had to kind of verify that for the jury. But Jane was saying, well, this girl can't even buy her own drinks, when Diddy and this other woman first started talking. And Jane explained that she pushed Diddy's head onto a counter when he was bending over as he looked like he was about to tie his shoes. And she said, well, I just, as far as how hard she pushed his head down, she said, well, I gave it a good shot. And so then Jane is saying that she threw candles and glass everywhere and telling Diddy, I hate you, I hate you, I hate you. And that wax got onto Diddy, and while she was throwing those candles at him, and that Diddy got angry. He was calling her crazy. And then Jane said she tried to leave the kitchen to go to the primary bedroom, or the master bedroom as she calls it, and that she was telling Diddy just to leave. Jane ended up locking the bedroom door. He kicked that open. She locked herself in the primary bathroom. He kicked that open off the hinges. Jane said she went into her walk-in closet. He kicked that door down too. So Jane went into the hallway, about to leave out of the front door. But while she was in that closet, Jesse, she explained that she changed clothes. But I think an interesting point where she said she changed clothes was she said that she put on like a kind of a baggy dress and some heels on. And she said that while she was back in the hallway trying to leave out of the front door, that Diddy ended up kicking her and then put her in a chokehold. And she said, I couldn't breathe. I was on my tippy toes. And that she ended up kind of squirming her way out of his grip. And she said, I just wanted to run and get away from him. And so she ended up hiding behind this wall 6 blocks away from her house, barefoot, because remember, as I said, she was in heels for a little bit. And she said that she was just barefoot in a dress. And she said, I just needed myself. I needed to get away. So she didn't even have a phone on her when she had left. She didn't have her ID on her. She had nothing on her but her person, according to her testimony. And she said she hid for about 2 hours, or what felt like 2 hours to her. And she said when she turned the corner to head back towards her apartment, she said, I saw Sean walking toward me. And Jane said that she went into the guest bedroom of her home. Diddy kicked that door in too. She kept throwing glasses and candles at him, and that Jane and Diddy both ended up on the patio. And she says, I just remember that I punched him and he punched me, but Diddy had no injuries. Jane was explaining that she just kind of curled up into a ball at this point while she's outside on the patio on the ground. And she said that Diddy ended up punching her in the head more than once, and that she was just trying to cover her head as far as why she was balled up kind of in the grassy area, and that Diddy punched her and he kicked her multiple times. And Diddy said something along the lines to Jane that she had testified to. He said, that you're trying to take me away from my family. And then Diddy grabbed Jane by her arm and her hair and dragged her back into the house. And Jane said that she called the woman that Diddy was last on this, I guess, Utah trip with, using Diddy's phone during this kind of argument, during this violent encounter. And Jane was explaining that she was just angry and she was fuming, and that during this phone call, Diddy held her down as the other woman just said like very insulting things to her. And Jane had told this woman, "Shut up, he's beating my behind." And Diddy had FaceTimed Jonathan, the assistant, afterwards and said, "Well, tell this girl I wasn't with no girl on this family trip." And that's what Diddy had allegedly told Jonathan, the assistant. And so Jane said that she had 2 golf ball sized knots on her forehead. She had a black eye that was starting to form, and that she went into the shower afterwards, and that Diddy kept smacking her while in the shower. He was fully clothed, however she was not. And Jane ended up calling him a bitch. And so even after this, you would think that would kind of be the end, that the two would maybe go their separate ways that night. But she had explained that even after this, that Diddy just told her to put ice on it and put an outfit on. And that outfit, she thought it meant lingerie and high heels, and that's what she did. And even after the assault, Diddy used her phone to play pornography. And then they texted an escort named Anton using Jane's phone, and Diddy had texted Anton using Jane's phone saying, "Hey, what are you doing?" And then Diddy scrolled up and saw earlier messages from Anton about this mutual friend and this Vegas trip where they had. And then Jane was explaining, "Well, next thing I know, I had to go to my car door to open the gate for Anton, because I guess the clicker for the gate was inside her car." And the jury is shown a photo of Anton's contact number in Jane's phone. Jane says that Diddy told her, "We aren't going to end the night like this." And so she ended up covering her bruises and the knots on her forehead, the knots with her hair and the bruises with makeup. And it's interesting because that's kind of similar to what Cassie had testified to, as far as just what she had did to cover up the injuries that she sustained too during her relationship with Diddy. But then Anton ends up arriving to Jane's apartment. Then Jane and Diddy went to another room. Diddy confronted Jane about these messages between herself and Anton as far as this mutual friend, which was an unnamed rapper, and that Diddy accused Jane of cheating on him and all this other stuff. But ultimately what ended up happening is that she just took an ecstasy pill and she ended up performing oral sex on the entertainer named Anton. And she said it felt like forever, that she felt like she wasn't in her own body when she was doing this, and she felt disgusted and terrible, and that Jane didn't even tell Anton about the earlier violence, but he ended up leaving. And then she and Diddy kind of continued. He was accusing her of cheating, all this stuff. And that what ended up happening was that Jane was given money to pay for Anton, but also money to fix her doors, and that $3,000 or $4,000 went to Anton in an Uber, which is something that I guess you can do. You can send packages of money in an Uber to an entertainer, and that's what she ended up doing. And then she kept kind of the remainder of that, and it was supposed to go to fixing the doors on her apartment after they broke, but what ended up happening is she used it for other funds too. And so that was really just kind of the big gist of what had happened on June 18th of just last year. This happened very recently, if you put it into context, just a year ago.
And there were photos of these broken doors that were shown to the jury?
Yep, there were a lot of photos shown to the jury. So they saw the package money being sent to Anton on June 19th of 2024. Then they saw the Uber because she was trying to take a picture of the license plate. And then they did see an email from Jane to this company to repair the doors. Those were from August 27th of 2024. And in that email were the attachments of the various different kind of photos of just all the different doors that were broken or taken off their hinges or destroyed, pretty much, that according to her still haven't been fixed even to this day.
Yeah, this is, again, a complicated situation, because I understand the testimony to be, she claimed, Combs said to her basically along the lines of, "Take this bleeping pill, you're not going to ruin my bleeping night, go out there and bleep, bleep," you know? and claims, she said to him, I didn't want to do it. She ends up doing it. You could argue that seems to be more the clearer cut case of potential sex trafficking, but it's complicated by the fact she said, a few days later, she missed him, right? She missed him. And it goes to those complicated avenues of what is that relationship between, again, just taking the allegations as true, an abuser and a victim, which I understand there was even discussion today about whether Dr. Dawn Hughes, a forensic psychologist who testified earlier in the trial, whether or not she'll have to be recalled to maybe explain some of this. Elizabeth, before we wrap things up, how did their relationship end? When was the last time that she saw him? And I understand we learned a little bit about more her connection to this case and what brought her to testify.
Yeah, so I was kind of waiting to hear from the prosecution that she was the woman that was in the hotel whenever Diddy got arrested, but we never got to that point because the last time she saw Diddy in person was in August of 2024, and that Diddy had told her to invite Dawn over for a hotel night. So even as late as August of 2024, she was still doing these hotel nights or wild debauchery nights. And so the jury is shown an exhibit, this being from September 9th of 2024, is a text between Diddy and Jane, and Jane said, well, whoever you're with can do it. And she was talking about Diddy asking her to send a sexually explicit video. And remember how I was saying around this time when Diddy had made his trip back to New York, whenever he was over in his hotel before he got arrested, that HSI saw like women's bags inside his hotel room. And so Jane was kind of saying, well, whoever you're with inside wherever you are here in New York, that you can get that sexually explicit video from her. But I thought what was interesting is that, so Diddy is arrested in September of 2024. Jane was subpoenaed in November of 2024, but she said she never spoke with prosecutors even before that. So from November of 2024 until January of 2025, she didn't have any other meetings with them. Jane was explaining that she had been in therapy for the last 3 months, and that Diddy still pays for her rent and even the current lawyer that she has. And so Jane was explaining that she did have meetings with Diddy's attorneys. And I thought what was interesting is that she told the defense attorneys first about what had happened on June 18th of 2024 before even telling prosecutors about this incident. And so she said she didn't even reveal this anything about this violent incident until April of 2025, so just a couple months ago. And she said that she was still processing that night. And so Jane said that at first she felt obligated to meet with Diddy's attorneys based on her relationship with him. And honestly, from what I could feel while she was on the witness stand, I felt like she felt possibly, and I'm presuming this or assuming this, that she seems like she's still in love with him in some type of aspect. And I think that's something maybe the defense will really point out when they cross-examine her tomorrow. But she was even asked in the final line of questioning, how do you feel about Diddy? Something that other people have testified to as well, including Cassie. But as far as Jane is concerned, Jane said that she prays for his continued healing and for peace for him. And she didn't say as far as I still love him, I miss him. She didn't say any of that. And I thought at this particular moment where she said that I pray for his continued healing and peace for him, that she would turn and look at him or just look at him in the eye or just something. And we never saw that from what I could see of Jane, even while she was testifying. For the most part today, she kept her head down, rarely even looked at AUSA Maureen Comey when she was asking her questions. And so I thought for that moment, okay, maybe she might look at him directly. Maybe there would be some type of look, and we didn't see that at all. She really just kind of kept her head down, even just saying that.
That time frame is interesting because it explains the superseding indictment. It explains why she was added and how she was added and when she was added to it. But it almost feels like not a reluctant witness, but not a typical victim in a sex trafficking case who would testify and talk about the torment of your abusers and what it was like. I say a classic example would be somebody who was kidnapped by this organization and sex was shipped off to different clients and maybe was rescued by authorities and now testifying against the perpetrator of the sex trafficking ring. You're not getting that. Doesn't mean that they're not hitting points for the prosecution, but you wonder how beneficial this witness was for the prosecution's case. Sex trafficking, maybe not. Transportation to engage in prostitution, I think she definitely helped support that, literally paying, transporting sex workers and herself for prostitution purposes across different cities. Probably that supports it. But I will be very curious to see where the cross-examination goes, for sure. Elizabeth Millner, thank you so much, and really, really great reporting as always.
Thanks, Jesse.
And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.